Hey, everybody. My name is JP Blaho. I'm a director of product marketing here at Catchpoint. And for the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to provide you with a bartender's guide to network monitoring. So just a little bit about me. I'm relatively new to the DEM or digital experience monitoring space. Most of my career has focused on network security. So I do have kind of an understanding on where an SRE fits within the infrastructure and operations organization. But when I moved into this role and moved into the role within Catchpoint specifically, it was kind of in the middle of the pandemic. It was right when we were in that shutdown mode where we were only supposed to leave our homes for essential services. And while I was stuck at home, I started experimenting with different flavors and different alcohols and created what I call the containment cocktail series. And through my experimentation, I got a better understanding for kind of the practices that true mixologists go through. And I shared some of my learnings and my experiences with friends and family over Facebook. But as I started to onboard within Catchpoint, I drew a couple of similarities with cocktail creation, i.e. a bartender, and the role of an SRE. So, because you are a tradesperson when it comes to observability, and like a bartender or a mixologist, you strive to make an experience flawless for your customers or for your users. You take all the tools available to provide the best experience you can. And like a bartender, you use those available ingredients to meet the expectations of your customers, kind of both internally or externally. You are part of a team that's pure responsibility is to delight your customers and ensure a repeatable experience so that they keep coming back. And that is very similar to the role and the responsibilities of a bartender. So in keeping it with the bartender theme, I want to share some insights. I want to provide a couple of examples, and I'm actually going to share a few of my homemade cocktail creations. First, I want to have a little bit of fun. I have a question to ask, and it's rhetorical, of course, because I can't hear your responses, but keep this response in your mind throughout the presentation. If the company you work for was a bar, what kind of bar would it be? I'll expand on this question in the coming couple of slides, but again, keep it in the back of your mind and keep it ready throughout the season, throughout this session, rather. So as I said, I work at Catchpoint, and through my short career here so far, I'd like to say that we're a tiki bar. And I might add that I'm slightly obsessed with tiki bars, so maybe it's my own personal desire to kind of jam that personal observation in. But as I've started to hone my bartending skills around tiki-based cocktails, I have a newfound respect and an understanding for the value that they bring and the experience that they provide to customers. So, at Catchpoint, we are a mid-sized and growing organization. Our culture is really about being strong, taking bold moves, and also having fun while we do it. We're a very social company. Even with us all being remote, we try to engage and spend as much time as we can learning about one another as well as learning from one another. We are also a very international company, so we have a lot of what I'll call flavors that really mix well together. And again, it's a lot like a tiki drink. It's a lot like a tiki bar. Tiki drinks are often strong. They are experimental in as far as they mix many different flavors together. And they're also a lot of fun. They add a little bit of flair and they're entertaining in and of itself. So again, think about the type of bar your company would be and try to draw some of those similarities to my presentation. So through this session, we're going to start with a conversation focused on the basics. And some of this information might be obvious to you. Some of it might be anecdotal, but it is all extremely relevant because without knowing the basics, you're pretty much assured an inconsistent experience. And once you know the base, once we cover the base, it's time to expand and customize. So you kind of need to know what resources you have to meet the basic expectations, but you also have to expand on observability. You have to understand what it takes to improve your customer's experience, which kind of leads to the next session on going beyond what you can do and what you need to do in order to exceed a customer's experience and their expectation. And the last section, which should not be ignored, is really about how you serve the drink, and how you engage with the leadership team, how you engage with infrastructure and operations, because this is most critical for your specific success. And sometimes you have to just stir it up to get your point across. And then at the end of the presentation, I'll share all of my contact information in case you do have follow-up questions, because a good bartender listens, adapts to the patron's requests, and I do want to make sure that your virtual cocktail is exactly what you ordered. So, as a bartender, there are a few basics you have to know. What kind of bar you're working at? Is it a speakeasy theme, a nightclub, a tiki bar, a wine bar? Because this actually sets the stage for what and how you will be serving. You also need to know what kind of customers acquaint your establishment. Is this a bar on the beach where sunbathers come up for a drink and take it back to their blanket? Or is it a jazz club that's right next to a theater and the crowd comes before and after a show? These types of things help you understand how much time they'll spend at your bar, the types of drinks that they're going to consume, and if they are repeat customers or they're coming for a one-time cocktail and they're on to the next. Another critical basic is to know what drinks are commonly requested, and based on the bar stock, what drinks you're actually capable of making, which leads to the most important piece: how to make the said available drink. So first, let me acknowledge that I'm not advocating or promoting drinking, especially during these sessions. But in light of my theme, I thought I'd share a couple of cocktail recipes. Some are basic, while others are of my own creation. So I use these cocktails and their respective recipes to draw similarities to bartenders and to SREs. And please remember, we need you in the fight for better observability. So drink responsibly and do not drink or drive. Drink and drive. So my first cocktail presentation is a Cosmopolitan. I share this recipe because, one, it's kind of growing in demand again. Two, it is one of the core cocktails a bartender needs to make. And three, it's what I like to call a first level cocktail, meaning you have to go beyond 2 mixers or 2 ingredients to make it. It's not a gin and tonic, it's not a vodka soda. It has 3 to 4 ingredients that actually make it unique. So it's an elevated cocktail. And these base cocktails, like the Cosmo, are really the beginning to advanced bartender training. So like the job of an SRE, consider the Cosmo to be like an organization who's just deciding to venture beyond old school networking. Now, this might seem obvious to anyone, but I think this year has really become an inflection point to ask the question again: what kind of business are you? From the perspective of a bartender asking this question, it's important to know that the answer sets limitations and establishes goals and requirements to achieve success. And what I mean by that is how you answer this question is dependent on what your goals are, what your limitations as an organization are, and what business requirements are to define success. I exemplify this with knowing the difference between the wine bar, the tiki bar, the nightclub example earlier, because each are different and each are unique experiences for the customer. This also means that a bartender's skill set must align with the different types of bars that they work at. For an SRE, this too is important. As part of a team, you need to know the business so that you can support it. If you don't have full comprehension of the business, then you end up becoming a reactive component. And this is not where you want to be, or at least this is not where you want to stay. One thing that I've learned in my experience with security operations and network operations is that while most understand their business, many don't focus or believe that they have a direct impact on the customer. And that is very different to your role. Perhaps it's due to their role and the layers between them and the customers, but it's common for larger organizations to have employees with very myopic focus. And why this is important is because the perception oftentimes drives the response. So being able to understand these realities and perceptions will help you set proper expectations and ultimately get you from focusing only on reactive issues, not only on reactive issues, but moving towards preventative efforts. But knowing your business or what kind of bar you are will help you validate the business and customer journeys. And it'll also empower you to drive change in those particular journeys. Because alignment of both the customer journey and empowering change are key for being able to optimize your role. In a survey done earlier this year by Catchpoint, we asked professionals like you, and we may have actually asked you, how SREs fit within their respective organizations. And while we haven't quite reached the halfway mark, a majority of enterprise organizations are building a dedicated site reliability practice. And that is a very, very promising side. So let's assume you know the business, but what about your customers? While it's debatable, I do believe that there are 3 customers to an SRE. We start with the core customer. That's the individual or the company that's paying for a service from your organization. I like to say that your second customer is likely your management team, because they usually get their guidance from customer demand as well as economic influences. And then your third customer is your infrastructure and operations team. Well, there are times that your role focuses on the closest customer, your DevOps and network teams. These efforts are likely reactive in nature and focus on solving known problems that are impacting the customer. Your goal is to get a model that is more proactive and responsive. True observability is the goal here, but a pragmatic approach is often required. So let's focus on the service levels. A service level agreement, as you know, is an agreement you make with your customers. This SLA is what I like to call the baseline obligation. It's really not the high mark goal. So in order to satisfy an SLA, there are a series of objectives you must meet, which are the SLOs. And then you measure those results and adjust accordingly through the observation of specific indicators, SLIs. So let's break it down from the perspective of a bartender. I've got a pop quiz for you. What would an SLA be to a to a bartender? Would it be A, a tasty cocktail that brings a smile to their face? B, a cocktail that is exactly what they ordered? C, a rave review on Yelp or a return visit from a customer? Or D, all of the above? Since you can't really tell me or raise your hand, the answer is B. It's the cocktail exactly as it was ordered. Some of you might have said all the above, but remember, the SLA is an agreement you make with the customer, that you provide the basic service of giving them exactly what they want, nothing more, nothing less. So let's move on to service level objectives. What are the objectives required in order to meet the SLA? And again, we're talking about a bartender. For a bartender, it's that the recipe itself and all the supplies are needed and available to actually make the drink. And the service level indicators for bartenders, kind of a mixed bag. From the perspective of the customer experience, the SLI is fairly simple. It's that the customer paid for said service with no complaint. The cocktail was made, they paid for the cocktail, they moved on. Now, an SLI internally would be that a receipt with the monies for that order are received and that the appropriate supplies that were needed to make the cocktail were used. So it's a two-way combination of indicators that help define that the cocktail was made. And as you can see, coming from the inside saying that a certain amount of alcohol was consumed to make a cocktail and a certain amount of money came in for the use of those said ingredients is very business oriented, and it doesn't take the customer experience into consideration. And it really comes to the question, is this all enough? And the answer is no, because a true tradesperson seeks to delight the customer and make the experience a memorable one. And as you, in your role, begin to customize, you soon realize that every customer, whether at a bar or on your company website, has a unique set of requirements and expectations that they would like to meet and would like to have met. And this is what I like to say is the true challenge for our connected generation. Now, I really would have loved to provide an example here of a bar or a restaurant, but the reality is that the pandemic heavily impacted this industry. But there is one industry down in the South where I live that has been able to remain extremely strong, and that's the real estate market. This example focuses on a mortgage company that supports home purchases in the Southeast region of the US, which if you're not in this area, I'm sure you can agree is an extremely fast growing area of the US. Now, the pandemic has placed restrictions on how businesses interact with clients and customers, and that's actually caused this industry to shift to a more remote workforce. And this has had an impact not only on how employees access applications from the cloud and from the corporate data center, but more critically, it impacts how this organization works with the lateral partners in the industry, such as real estate brokerage firms, banks, credit institutions, title companies, insurance firms, as well as law firms. And it also has changed how they interact with their customers. And one key factor to note, while most home buyers may not know this, there is a critical path to the home purchasing process that a mortgage brokerage firm must adhere to in order to secure funding, interest rates, and meet the closing date. And as one of the brokers told me, there really is no such thing as an easy home purchase. These efforts almost always require person-to-person interaction. So moving to a more distributed workforce has actually placed the strain on this already tight timeline. The dependencies have actually grown. In order to resolve these issues, they had to institute some process changes. One of the more interesting ones is that buyers and sellers that come to the closing table have to come at different times. They can't meet at the table. So sellers come first to sign off on all the documentation, and the buyers come afterwards to sign the purchase agreements and obtain the keys. This particular firm had to start looking at ways of becoming paperless, had to look at ways of less touch engagements with their customers. So they first started looking at organizations like Apple Card, Uber, Lyft, and even Rocket Loans, which is within their industry. And it helped them to develop a journey that would create an experience equal to, and in some instances better than how they used to be able to provide services to their customers. And three outcomes helped them along the way. One is they identified areas where online services can address gaps. So they increased their adoption of these particular SaaS services like Office 365, e-documentation services, as well as secure access and secure enablement services. It also revamped their customer journey, as I said, to focus more on moving as much online as possible, reducing the amount of person-to-person interaction, but assuring that these services are being well communicated to their customers throughout the entire purchase process. But most importantly, they realized that this can be a repeatable service. And this is something that does, however, require a monitoring and technical stack change. And as they've gone through this exercise, it's actually become very liberating for them because it's helped them move away from those homegrown applications that were very stagnant and served a singular purpose, and moving them towards a much more aggressive restructure of their infrastructure as well as their DevOps organization. And as such, they've actually uplifted their monitoring capabilities and are moving aggressively towards the DEM, full DEM platform, and building kind of a function of reliability engineering within the organization. So unless you're having a straight shot of liquor, most cocktails include juices, herbs, and spices and garnishes. So the next section, we're going to focus on kind of selecting the right ingredients. We started with understanding the base. Now let's talk about the right ingredients that are necessary. Most people will tell you in mixology, as well as in cooking and baking, that opting for fresh or premium ingredients really alter the flavors dramatically. And like in business, making sure that you have the right services, technologies, and ingredients in the right sequence with the right design ensure that the experience is equally satisfying. Ultimately, having these within your control are going to impact the type of SLA that you can provide your customer. And just like a bartender, this defines the type of service or cocktail menu and what it's going to look like to your customer. So next, it's cocktail time again. I am not prepared to share the real recipe. This is a base recipe off of one of my best friend's abuelas. And I probably would get killed if I shared some of the real processes that it takes in order to make a coquito. So why am I actually showing you this recipe? Well, first, it's seasonally appropriate. And Also, like other types of family recipes, it is heavily customized and requires a certain type of ingredient or a certain sequence of creating the cocktail to make it unique and special. And your organization, much like a Coquito, has some very unique components and capabilities that make it challenging, but also make it very unique. Looking back on our discussion around service level agreements, objectives, and indicators, ingredients used will most likely impact the service rendered. So aligning expectations to the capabilities is the name of the game here, and having the necessary ingredients to establish these expectations is key. So how do you know what the right ingredients are? Well, each business will start with best practices and map them against their needs, which I like to refer to as the recipe. But each organization will also have custom capabilities and needs which alter, if not enhance, that said recipe. This is what makes your business unique. And the way to fully understand if this recipe works for your digital customers is to take that user journey and map out all the dependencies. Identify the critical path along those dependencies, and then prioritize your observability plan from them. Defining this helps identify the key indicators needed. Now, you may have a few digital journeys to work from, and this is where it does get complicated because you're going to be overlaying these processes to not just optimize cost and infrastructure savings, but you're also going to use it because some of the steps are extremely similar. But at the very least, please make sure that the indicator values are appropriate against each journey map, even though the steps are the same. Even analysts are kind of confirming this, and they're saying that user experiences are merging between the employee and the customer, and it's going to impact how businesses measure success and productivity. That's a huge boon for digital experience monitoring, but it does, in the meantime, kind of make your lives a little bit more complicated. So expanding on the digital user experience, I share on this slide a snapshot of what a potential Catchpoint employee may experience when using the internet for work. And this is a generalization, but as you can see, whether they're working remotely or from a secondary office or from HQ, their pathway or their journey being utilized to access these applications are somewhat different. And that's specific to whether they're using SaaS applications or whether they're using kind of corporate-owned applications. Why I share this image is because I've overlaid kind of the node infrastructure that we use to measure each step of the digital experiences so that we can monitor, manage, and sometimes change the delivery chain or the digital delivery chain. You know, consider this a best practice image because in order to assure that the right ingredients are being used, you must constantly test, and test. But let's not forget that there are oftentimes third-party integrations used to enhance the experience. And if they're not monitored, they can potentially ruin the recipe. I like to use an example, and no, I apologize if people disagree with me here, but the CNN website is extremely painful to me. I'm a news junkie, so I go to multiple sites on a daily basis. But if you actually go to the CNN website, you're going to see that it's a smorgasbord of news, advertising, videos, and call to actions. And by the time the main page is populated, you end up getting a pop-down ad from the top of the screen. And I've been known to click on that ad because I'm trying to get access to a headline. And by the time I make the click, it takes me to an advertising page, and then I have to go back and I have to wait for it to reload again. So the experience itself can leave me very unsatisfied. But let me share a better case with you. Recently, we spoke to one of our newer customers, and they're a large conglomerate who was expanding their streaming service to kind of coincide with a new product launch that they have. And they started to see a pretty large growing demand in the Middle East. As they expanded into this region, some of their customers were starting to have an inconsistent experience, specifically in the United Arab Emirates region. And this was a concern because the UAE has a pretty extensive mobile and wired infrastructure. And their customers in this region don't just expect, they actually demand a high level of service. So these customer complaints were being analyzed, and unfortunately the organization itself couldn't see within their network that there were any problems. So upon trialing a DEM platform, specifically for network monitoring, they quickly realized that it was their CDN provider And they were hosting, the CDN provider was actually hosting the streaming service from a point of presence that was closer to the northern areas of the Middle East, not in the central and the southern areas where UAE sits. And while this may be acceptable to metropolitan areas like Tel Aviv and Cairo, it actually started to create latency for Abu Dhabi and Dubai. So they were, based on this information, able to go back to their CDN provider and work to get a new host that was closer to the United Arab Emirates. And then within their DEM platform, they actually started implementing what we call high frequency object tests to monitor the availability of the CDN edge servers from locations and of actual end users to kind of assure that the vendor was providing the service against the SLA across their customer base. So they were even extending this monitoring capabilities and the scheduled testing to go beyond that to the origin servers and assure that performance was available across all the hops. So now that I'm putting my bartender back on, let's now focus on going beyond the recipe. We talked about the basics. We talked about having a good recipe. And now it's time to kind of go beyond that. So even though the ingredients are there, you still have to test it and assure that they're a desired quality. And what I mean by that is you may know the recipe. You may have all of the things available to you to make a good cocktail. But, quick question, are you sure that the soda water you're using didn't go flat? Are all the fruits that you're squeezing, the fresh fruits that you're squeezing or using as garnish, are they truly ripe? Is the alcohol that you're using still good? These are the types of things that go beyond just the recipe that are required of a bartender. And so this is where your role as the bartender, or I actually mean SRE, has the most value. You have to look beyond what you have direct control over and monitor all areas to assure consistency. You may not be able to have direct control, but you can actually influence better outcomes or look for better ingredients. So now that I've kind of discussed this a little bit, I figured it's now time to share my favorite cocktail. Let me introduce to you the volcano, AKA the flaming volcano, AKA the scorpion bowl. This recipe is my own creation, and it's based on some of my favorite Asian restaurant and tiki bar cocktail recipes. And while I definitely don't recommend this as a single server cocktail, I'm sharing it because it best exemplifies what I said earlier about going beyond the recipe. If you have ever ordered this cocktail, it truly embodies the experience. From the taste, to the bowl that it is served in, to the lighting of the volcano in the center, and to taking those super large 2-foot+ straws to drink from. The experience is so much more than the cocktail itself. But let's talk about what this means to you, to SREs, and to the digital experience. I talked before about the CNN website, as well as the example from the conglomerate. And going back to the CNN website, if you've ever done it, you'll see that it is an explosion of experiences that may not make for the correct recipe, but it's important to acknowledge that if you know your user journey, then you can actually enhance that experience with the additional ingredients instead of destroying them. With the increasing adoption of third-party infrastructures, services, and tools, including the adoption of multi-DNS, multi and hybrid cloud, multi-DNS, multi-CDN, multi-SD-WAN, and SASE, to name just a few, your journey starts to get extremely complicated, and your visibility into the journey gets even more difficult. Ironically, many of these services are actually designed to improve operations and increase security, but they can actually come at the cost of visibility. So I'll say it again, every additional layer of the delivery chain adds more complexity, introduces visibility gaps, and reduces understanding of how infrastructure health is affecting the user experience. And the more we move from the edge and outward into the delivery chain, the bigger the challenges are to see and even control. Removing those barriers of visibility are absolutely required to assure a high-performing user experience. The image that I'm sharing on this slide is a visualization of the user journey from the endpoint to the intended application and back, from the last mile to the service provider backbone and to the cloud service. Visualizing and measuring against this journey, understanding this journey, it will help you assure that reachability, availability, performance, and repeatability are also what we like to call the 4 pillars of observability can be achieved. In bartending terms, the venue is reachability. Availability would be the menu. Performance is kind of the creation and the delivery of the cocktail. And repeatability is, well, repeating the experience over and over again. So again, knowing your basis, having the right ingredients and the tools to prepare that cocktail, or I should say that amazing cocktail, are all required to ensure that your customer is ultimately delighted. But even with all these capabilities, without you, the bartender, the experience cannot be achieved. So let's talk about you. I did change this section a little bit to pay homage to, unfortunately, recently departed Sean Connery. But this phrase actually has some meaning that I can use. First, as you all know this line, any bartender is going to tell you that a martini is never stirred. So let's take this quote to mean just do it right. At the end of the day, it's not that a cocktail tastes great. The total experience includes the venue, the interaction between the bartender and the customer, the potential theater of watching a bartender's craft, and even the presentation from the glassware to the garnish help make that total experience enjoyable. It takes knowing your bases, using the right ingredients in the right quantities, and using all other components to create that wow factor experience. When it comes to the SRE, look at your role as being similar to a bartender. Remember, you are part of the ingredients, and don't just make a great cocktail, but you make a great customer experience. There are a few areas that fall outside the standard monitoring tools and network telemetry, and I'd like to take the last few minutes of the presentation to discuss them with you, hence where the use of shaken, not stirred comes in. But first, the last cocktail. And of course, it has to be a martini. That is absolutely imperative to this entire presentation. It would actually have been a real shame if I didn't. However, unlike a gin or vodka martini, I'm going to share a custom dessert martini that is, again, seasonally relevant. So I'm providing you with the Snickerdoodle martini. I offer this cocktail up and recipe for your own use. Feel free to screenshot it. But I use this cocktail for a couple of reasons. Number one, when something is as good as this, it's even more enjoyable when you can make it or share it with others. Number two, it's actually very interesting when you find a combination of ingredients that you don't normally think will work, but when you try it out, it ends up kind of accentuating, if not making the total experience even more delicious. And three, sometimes, well, you're just in the mood for something different. So those are my 3 reasons for creating the Snickerdoodle Martini. I hope you enjoy it if you choose to make it yourself. But I'm sure you're going to find yourself in similar situations when you're able to identify potential issues or risks. And by sharing it with the DevOps team or with the network team, you're actually helping them address something that they did not see or doesn't really show up in their own testing and quality control efforts. So again, when something is this good, it's time to share it. And sharing the data, the information, or the recipe, as it will, kind of goes beyond reactive and proactive measures. It's the start of building a relationship that prevents failures, anomalies, and inconsistencies. There's also an experiential component to your job, in that you need to be more aware of kind of the disparate teams and find ways to work with them. By doing this, you're actually mixing different ingredients to create something even more satisfying and valuable to the organization. So while your function in the SRE is evolving, it's important to note that today there's very little difference between employee users and customer users in terms of their mobility, accessibility, and network access. Our professional and customer personas have essentially merged. And as such, kind of understanding the digital experience is truly the responsibility of everyone in the company. Not only can our personal actions help us define the user journey for an organization, but being self-aware of our role in the journey is key to moving the company culture away from the silo of employees with individual roles and responsibilities and to a more engaged team that understands how their role helps support a digital experience model. And the humor is not lost on me because we're all now virtual. Most of us aren't working in office spaces. It adds a new level of complexity and difficulty to overcome, but it's where we need to be. you in your role can actually bridge that gap rather, and map the business goals to the I&O team outcomes. Without being cheesy, you can actually be an agent of change within the organization. But it really starts with mapping out all the digital user journeys. Even though the customer and the employee experiences are converging, how they are measured are often sometimes different. And understanding these journeys will only empower you to be a source of knowledge and not just a go-to whenever there's a problem that needs to be resolved. But I think one of the more important things to say is that you have a position that is based on data, and that should be shared across the DevOps team as well as the network team and even the security teams. You are a wealth of information. Don't be afraid to use this data, to use this information to shape your voice and move beyond the reactive mode to focus on proactive and preventative efforts. Only then can you take leadership in observability. Because remember, the only difference between a bartender and a doctor is that a bartender doesn't require a prescription to medicate. And maybe the only difference between a bartender and an SRE is that a site reliability engineer shouldn't have to worry about spilling or breaking. Now, out of personal curiosity, I would love for you to kind of come up with your own analogies between a bartender and a site reliability engineer. And I'd love to hear what those are, because I do intend to kind of build this story out a little bit more over time. With that, I'd like to thank you for listening in on my own personal experience. I hope that you were able to learn something new, but if not, I hope you were able to find this entertaining. And if not, at least you have 4 solid cocktail recipes to take away. So if you have any questions, you can find me on the SREcon Slack channel. You can also reach me via direct message on Twitter. Feel free to follow me on Twitter too. But finally, you can always send me an email with any questions you might have, whether they're cocktail-based, whether they're SRE-wise, or whether it's around Catchpoint itself. I'm here to help. I'm here to learn. And I do look forward to speaking to you all, and hope you all enjoy the rest of the show.